Now, in last week's video in our little series on the Hammerklavier Sonata, I was giving you the solution, so to say, at least I hope, of this mysterious metronome mark. And we were quoting from a footnote here in Schindler's biography written by Moscheles, so annotated, edited by Moscheles, a footnote by Moscheles, in which he shed light on the reason why he gave quarter note 138 in his edition and not half note 138. I will link the video here in case you haven't seen that. Might be interesting, because this video is a kind of follow-up to that video. What we will see in this video is the fact that in the 19th century, when people changed the metronomic indication for the Hammerklavier Sonata like Moscheles did and Ries did, basically they didn't change, they changed the note value since they wouldn't want to touch the sacred, so to say, metronomic value that Beethoven gave. But when they did, the reason they gave was always based upon the understanding of the piece, the character of the piece, and actually never for technical reasons they made a change. That's changed in the 20th and 21st century. We're going to talk about that. So let's start the video just by giving you again the same quote as we did last time, the footnote written by Moscheles. I have in my edition of this sonata marked the time of the first movement 138 of Melzer's metronome, because Beethoven himself had fixed that number. He, according to Wegeler's Notizen, gives it with a minim, I with the crotchet. But neither of these can, to my mind, be made to suit the character of the movement. The minim increases it so fearful a prestissimo as Beethoven could never have intended, since he desired the assai, originally prefixed to the allegro, to be omitted. The crotchet slackens the movement all too much. And although I have in my edition allowed Beethoven's numbers to remain in deference to the great man, yet I would advise the player to hold a middle course according to the following mark, half note 116. And so also in last week's video I made some short excerpts here on the Fritz, recorded with this microphone, which is not the best microphone for music, but anyway, to give you an idea what these three metronomic values meant when you applied the whole beat or double beat reading to them. If you're not familiar with whole beat and double beat reading, that's basically the use of the metronome, where the metronome indicates a subdivision of the note value and the metronome mark, and not the note value on itself with one click. There are some videos on the channel. I will link one for you here in the upper right hand corner, or just click on the eye icon in case you haven't seen the introduction video to that, what I think, historical use of the metronome. Now, interesting, in the quote of Moscheles, we see not a single word on the technical implayability of the piece. If people in the 19th century write about on the Hammerklavier Sonata in relationship with the metronome mark, and certainly if they're going to change it, you will see almost never, if ever, the explanation that the change is made because of the technical implications. Always you will read that the character needs a little bit of a slower tempo. As for instance Hans van Bülow. So van Bülow writes 112 for the half note. So let's say a similar tempo as Moscheles. And he writes, with the metronomization insofar as it principally affects the character of the principal motive, the editor finds himself considerably at variance with the statement of Karl Czerny, Art of Delivery, Part 4 of the Pianoforte School, who, in his quality of first and contemporary interpreter of the later pianoforte works of Beethoven, deserves to be consulted as an authority, Of course, not altogether an infallible one. Czerny's tempo 138 that so little agrees with the ponderous energy of the theme, there you have it, and seems to be taken too quickly even for the sections of this movement which admit of a greater acceleration, perhaps finds in the lack of sonority of the Viennese pianofortes of the time a kind of justification. On a modern concert grant of the first quality, and such a one in a certain sense a substitute for the orchestra, is required for the due rendering of this sonata. Czerny's tempo would have bewildering and blurring effect. So Bülow, I don't know, but it seems to be that Bülow was not really aware of the publication of Ries and Wegler where these metronome numbers were published. So he kind of bases his judgment on the edition that Czerny made. But anyway, Bülow lowers his tempo from 138 to 112 for reason of the pianoforte, for reason also of the character of the piece, not because it's unplayable. Now, apart from the fact of the Viennese piano is more suitable for this tempo than 106 than the modern grand piano in Bülow's time. We can have a discussion on that. It's not really relevant here. For instance, also a little later edition, the Casella Beethoven edition, lowers this tempo also to 112, and he says Beethoven himself marked the metronomical indication this sonata, and it was the only time, it's indeed the only metronome number from Beethoven's hand for the piano sonatas. However, a few of his indications are evidently inexact. For instance, the first tempo bore 138, absolutely incompatible with the Napoleonic grandiosity of the granite-like piece of music. Bülow's 112 is undoubtedly more correct. So again, not a technical issue, a matter of character of the piece. Now, all of that changes if you go to the 20th century and certainly the 21st century, then these metronome numbers, the mystery, so to say, of the metronome numbers for the Hammerklavier Sonata are not being discussed from a perspective of character, but from a technical perspective. So if we go to the same article that I was referring to a few weeks ago by Martin Noortuin, he is clearly reading these 19th century scores from today's perspective that the Hammerklavier Sonata is kind of unplayable, and that statement doesn't need any proof whatsoever. We can see that in the way he builds this article. So let me quote from the article. Quote, although it has now secured its place in the repertoire, the Opus 106, this Hammerklavier Sonata, it only acquired its position several decades after it was written, unlike some of Beethoven's other works which were popular straight away, such as the Septet Opus 20. This can be at least partially explained by the fact that throughout its lengthy playing time, the performer of Opus 106 is confronted with almost insurmountable technical challenges, often exacerbated by the rather fast tempo that Beethoven indicates. So then he refers to Arthur Schnabel's admirable, in his words, but no means flawless attempt to tackle these difficulties recorded in the 1930s. And then continues by saying other pianists have delivered much more controlled performances, but have often done so by playing all four movements at a slower speed than indicated. So, and then he makes the bridge to earlier sources, 19th century sources, and he is kind of uneasy with the situation, because in these 19th century sources, and he's actually factually correct about not quoting them as describing a technical impossible situation. But he wants to make the connection between you as a reader and those sources, because after all, in the entire 19th century, no one actually wrote about the Hammerklavier Sonata as being totally unplayable. Then modern scholars who are defending this metronome number in single beat have a huge problem, because it's not thinkable that those musicians like Moscheles, Bülow, and even Liszt could do things that no human living being today can do. It's simply impossible. We have better conservatories, we have better education, we have seen much more complex and difficult music than the Hammerklavier Sonata. So they have to find a way to make this bridge and to make you read as a reader from the perspective of today, in which indeed the Hammerklavier Sonata is seen impossible to play, and read those sources in the same way. So the bridge here is the sentence, of course. 20th century pianists were hardly the first to struggle with the sonata. Only this opens in your mind the fact, well, yeah, what I'm about to read now is the same thing as I am thinking right now, which is not the case. To be honest and to give credit to Martin Noorten, he is not really writing that, he's suggesting that. So he continues to say, as the piece was considered unusually difficult to understand. Of course, this little word you have to emphasize and to focus on to realize that what these quotes are talking about is not anymore a technical impossibility to play, but that this piece is hard to understand. Which is actually also given in the reviews that Noorten gives further on, which are really interesting. So this is an article published on 5th of January 1835 in the French periodical Le Pianiste. And he writes, Opus 106, 109, 110, it's Noorten's translation here. In these three works, 106 in particular, the musical sense is almost as clear as in a philosophical treatise of Kant, or a chapter of Mr. Cousin. There is no doubt that Beethoven, who was more deaf than ever at this time, did not understand himself what he wrote, but this infirmity, so fatal to a musician, had perhaps rendered his intuitive sense more delicate and enabled him to see nebulae, which we cannot distinguish. In general, his last works are imbued with a sort of mysticism that is impenetrable to the common people. So again, it's a weird review, I would say, someone talking on Beethoven. We wouldn't do that today. But anyway, it's not saying it's impossible to play, it's hard to understand. And to close this section on Noorten, that's actually also what Berlioz is referring to in his review on the performance of Franz Liszt, where he says Liszt has explained the work in such a way that if the composer himself had returned from the grave, joy and pride would have swept over him. So that's an important distinction that I really want you to keep in mind. Every time you read something, is this quote, or is this guy, or is this pianist, or reviewer, or musician, or whoever in the history talking about the technical impossibilities of the Hammerklavier Sonata or any other piece, or not? And oftentimes you will see in the 19th century that oftentimes it is not. As if you will not find one single source in the entire 19th century saying that the Czerny etudes were unplayable at the metronomic speeds. That only should make you think about the whole situation anew. So I hope this was helpful. There is a lot more to say on the Hammerklavier Sonata, and we're definitely going to return to that work because I think we could make 5,000 videos of this work alone. If this is the first video you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button, also the bell icon so you don't miss any updates. And if you would like to support our work here and become member of our little circle of insiders, I would say there is a link to our Patreon site here and in the description box. Thank you very much for even considering this. And for now, thanks for watching and see you soon again.